A very good afternoon to everyone. It's such a pleasure and honor to join the discussion along with the distinguished participants of this conference today. And thank you so much, Colonel Giuseppe and your team at NATO Center of Excellence for Stability Policing for organizing a workshop and conference like this. And I'm happy that Afghanistan's experience of police development post-2001 can be used, discussed, of course, and documented first to guide the future attempts of the development of law enforcement forces, either in countries with similar context, but at the same time, hopefully in Afghanistan itself at some point in time in the future. So I would be very brief with my take on, first of all, I would be focusing on the police development itself, which has been part of the stability operation in Afghanistan, and I would discuss the challenges we had in terms of police development in Afghanistan. So I'm going to put my take in three main points, or the three main reasons why do I feel we had challenges that we could never overcome that ahead of police development or police force development in Afghanistan. The first one was the war on terror strategy in Afghanistan, which undermined the counter-crime and protection of citizens in Afghanistan. So for 2 decades, from my perspective, and at the same time working for the Afghan government for a couple of years lately, for 2 decades almost, the counter-terrorism and counter-insurgency in Afghanistan were the highest priority, and not the citizens' protection and the law enforcement or establishing rule of law in Afghanistan. So it was undermined big time by the counterterrorism and insurgency. But at the same time, it was not only a priority for the Afghan security and defense institutions, but at the same time, the institutions were designed to respond to counterterrorism and insurgency, including the police force and the Ministry of Interior Affairs. Just a couple of points here that I would like to raise is that the law enforcement in Afghanistan, they were trained, the police force that I served, and I had the honor of serving them, were trained to fight in the battlefields. They were merely trained to protect citizens, but at the same time, the capabilities to protect or to take the security measures for a demonstration or to investigate a criminal activity, the capability was pretty limited in terms of the number of, or the force size, or the number of individuals serving in the counter-crime unit. To have more fighters on the ground for counterterrorism operations, the police force were militarized, even equipment-wise. And I would say, yes, the civilian policing was neglected. Although Afghanistan's, comparably, when we have been putting the data and the numbers from 2011 to 2018, when I was serving at the Ministry of Interior Affairs, putting the numbers in terms of the criminal activities rate and the death toll due to criminal activities and the death toll due to the terrorist attacks. When we have been putting them together, the death rate as a result of criminal activities was 150 to 200% higher than the terrorist attacks, which basically meant that we are losing more lives due to criminal activities than the terrorist attack. But end of the day, if we compare that, when we compare that to the number or the size of the counter-crime unit or the capability we had only 10% of our police forces trained and equipped to counter-crime. So the proportions to us, there was a big gap in terms of the response or the capability to respond, but at the same time, the criminal cases that we had recorded. But then the other fact on the side of it was that there has been a high rate of unreported committed crime cases in Afghanistan, which basically meant that we failed to protect our citizens because of the limited capabilities we had developed in the police force, and the police force was, the role and the mandate of police force was aligned with the counterterrorism and counterinsurgency in Afghanistan. But then on the other hand, not only that police force was a support force for the Afghan National Army, the casualty on the police force side was higher than the army because police was functioning in small checkposts compared to the army, which was the serving in bases. That's why police force has been somehow the front line to Taliban's attacks and the insurgency's attacks, I would say. The second point I have in terms of the challenges we had ahead of the police force development was that the police force in Afghanistan happened to be the victim of reintegration of ex-Mujahideen members post-2001. So we had our ex-Mujahideen members in Afghanistan who had fought during this 1990s civil war, and their ranks were granted to them in the police force based on the number of years or based on how politically they're connected to the warlords of the civil war. And as a result, that left a highly politicized police force behind, because the structure at the top, most of them happened to be commanders in the police force as well. So even the recruitments that came all the way down to the soldier level, even the recruitments were politicized. The Afghan National Directorate of Security, where they have been taking care of the intel services, and the Afghan National Army, because they had a longer history in Afghanistan. When post-2001, they re-established the recruitment mechanisms they had in the past. There has been an institutional memory and individuals who could hold those measures in terms of recruitments. But at the same time, as part of the political process, the recruitment criteria for the police force loosened up. And because police force did not have a longer history as much as the army or the intel services or the National Directorate of Security, it was put in the ground as I would say, as an institution or as a force that ex-Mujahideen member could be reintegrated into the normal forces. The last point that I have here that I always believe that it has been one of the biggest challenges we had, and I'm trying to bring my personal experience while working for the Afghan police force and the Ministry of Interior, and at the same time working with the Office of National Security Council on security sector reform, was that we didn't have a very clear vision, but at the same time consensus on both the Afghan side and the international community side on what the main role of the police forces could be, all the way actually from their main rules and functions to the training and equipment. Police forces, different units had different trainings, different, of course, equipments, not just because their functions differed, but just because what was available to them. The army was normally getting the best in terms of training because it was more resourceful, but when it comes to the police, first of all, because there had been more countries engaged in police development, but at the same time, the police force was not in terms of the training and equipment, and aligning the training and equipment and the very clear mandate based on the police force, the police law. There has been a gap there. I could see a gap there. And the police was not functioning based on the police law, based on what was justified to be the need at that point in time, or to be a critical need to support the army. So there has never been a very clear, I would say, vision or a consensus on what the police force should be doing. They have been doing literally everything in the security and defense sector, but at the same time, they hardly specialized in specific areas, including disaster management. So those are the three main points that I would add, which led to challenges, and I would say, yes, failures as well, in terms of developing a functioning, at the same time, effective police force in Afghanistan, which affected the rule of law in Afghanistan. It also affected protection of citizens in Afghanistan, and ultimately, I would connect it to the withdrawal of the support from the Afghan Democratic Republic, the central government, by the public. So, end of the day, since police failed protecting them, police failed to establish rule of law or enforce the law, that was very much connected to the failure in building, sustaining, I can't say building, sustaining the legitimacy of the central government as well. But the last point that I would like to add here is that it was also not, there has been some positive outcomes as well. throughout the process. And part of it is the recruitment and the presence of 3,000 plus women across different ranks in the police, ranks and levels in the police force, who proved to be very efficient and effective. I think we needed a little bit more time in terms of developing it, but the cornerstone at the beginning was put, I can't say in a wrong direction, but we could do much more than that in terms of compared to the amount, or considering the amount of resources and efforts we have been putting into it. We could expect a much better outcome if we had given a different direction to the police force development process. Thank you so much again for having me, and thank you so much for organizing this event.